So Zach is also working on this project with us as well. In our dryland environment, we tend to produce a lot of grain crops, but we also have a lot of livestock as part of the production system. We do produce a lot of wheat. Texas produce about 96% of the grain sorghum production in the United States. Almost 75% of all feedlots in the US are located in the Central Great Plains. In Kansas, we have almost about 80% of all the feedlots located here in the southwestern part of the state. We do have most of the feedlots in western Kansas. With these going to work.
If you face the computer, does it work?
Maybe where I'm standing. All right, I can use this to advance the slides. So we do have over 70% of all the feedlots located in the western part of the state. Most of these feedlots are dependent on corn silage or grain corn production to feed this livestock. But we all know the issues that we have right now with the Ogallala Aquifer. Most of our groundwater in some places is significantly depleted. So we won't be able to produce most of the grain to feed this livestock. But we need to keep the livestock industry in western Kansas. So some of the things that we can do is to produce forage. Annual forages are very important. If we can produce these forages, we will have it available to feed the livestock industry. Also, forages uses less water than grain crops like corn. So growing forages, I think this one will work better. Growing forages around here can help to diversify the production system that we have in western Kansas, and that can also help to improve the profitability of the entire production system as well. Right. So we've been working on a lot of this forage research, looking at a couple of annual forages that we can grow in dryland environments. This is a chart that we put together, looking at kind of forages that we can grow. So crop residue, this is something that we can use. We grow a lot of corn and grain sorghum. We can use this as a forage resource. We can also grow winter wheat or triticale or rye can be planted in the fall. And then you can start grazing this as early as November. You can graze it all the way even through May, or if you leave it to grow, you can hay it as a hay crop. We can grow oat or triticale in the spring. And then we're also looking at forage sorghums. They are well adapted to our environment. So we grow a lot of forage sorghum, Sudan grasses, and millets. And quite recently, we've been looking at other alternative legume crops. We have looked at cowpea and also labna. So this is a picture from some of the work that we've been doing in hays. We do winter wheat, triticale, and hybrid rye variety trials. This is a picture from one of our fields in 2021. Here we plant the triticale, rye, and winter wheat in September. And then by May, we are able to harvest it as a hay crop. One thing that I want to point out is the cereal rye is a little bit winter hardy, and it's also more drought tolerant than winter wheat. So in the early spring, it comes out of dormancy a little bit earlier and can put on a lot more biomass compared to winter wheat. The problem with that is it gets stamy a little bit earlier, so the nutritive value is less than wheat. Winter wheat is a little bit less productive compared to the cereal rye, but triticale is a cross between wheat and rye. So it has some of the good qualities of rye and also some of the good qualities of wheat. So it has a little bit more nutritive value compared to the rye. And then you can also graze triticale a little bit harder than winter wheat. The other good thing about rye and triticale is they are not susceptible to wheat streak mosaic virus. So like last year when we had a severe infestation of wheat streak virus, We didn't have that in the rye or triticale, but the wheat in our variety trials has significant damage from that. If you harvest this at good stage, the nutritive value is a little bit higher. The crude protein is about 20 to 25%. When you harvest a subdough, that is where you get a little bit more biomass, but that reduces the nutritive value. This is some data that we've collected. This is harvesting at good stage, 2022 up to 2025. The blue bars represent the hybrid rye yields. The red bars represent the triticale yields, and the green bars is with the wheat. As I mentioned, the rye does a little bit better than the triticale. So when we harvest this at good stage consistently, the rye produce a little bit more biomass than triticale, and both of them had greater yields compared to winter wheat. So on average, when we average this across the 4 years, when we harvest at good stage, the rye produce about 2,160 pounds per acre. The triticale about 1,900 pounds per acre, and the wheat is about half the biomass we get from the triticale and rye. However, when we harvest a subdough, the triticale tends to catch up. After heading, can put a lot more grain on, so the yields at good stage is similar to the hybrid rye. So when we harvested at good stage, most of the time, triticale and rye yields are not that different. Average across the years, we have about 4,300 pounds per acre with the hybrid rye. And then we have 4,000 pounds per acre with triticale. Statistically, they are not different. The wheat is about 2,700 or 2,800 pounds per acre. This is all under dryland in Hayes. We do have similar experiments in Garden City, which is irrigated, and the yields are a little bit higher than what we get from Hayes. One thing I want to point out is the problem we have with the winter wheat is the varieties that we have are few. We had about 2 or 3 varieties within our trial, but triticale we tend to get about 8 to 10 varieties in the trial. So these bars represent an average of about 10 varieties. The hybrid rye is about 4. The problem is that more efforts are being geared towards triticale development compared to winter wheat, and it's because of the demand for cover crop seed. So there's a lot of demand for triticale seed to be planted at cover crop. So most of the companies and breeding programs are doing a lot of work with triticale. We don't have a triticale breeding program in Kansas, but University of Nebraska do have a breeding program. So we do evaluate some of their materials in our trials. One thing, there was a question about wheat variety trials for forage. So our wheat breeder in Hayes have started looking at some of these materials that we could develop or release very soon as a forage variety for Kansas. So when I go back, I'll talk to him about that. There's some questions about wheat for forage. So I'm hoping within 2 to 3 years, we may have something wheat variety that may be released for forage in Kansas as well. Then we look at spring oats and spring triticale. They do very well, especially oats when we have cooler and wet springs. They tend to do a little bit better when it's cooler. The triticale does a little bit more than the oat. What we found is in Hayes, on average, triticale produce about 4,000 to 5,600 pounds per acre. And the oat on average is about 3,500 to 4,500 per acre, depending on the year. One thing that we found was if you mix the two though, the yield tends to be a little bit greater than either triticale alone or oat. So we had some experiments near Cedar Bluff. K-State has a ranch south of the dam. So that is where we do most of our cover crop grazing experiments that I will talk about later. And this is a picture of our field there in Brownell where we're growing oat and triticale mix. This and triticale, when you plant it in the spring, you have a very short window to graze it. So by May, when it starts warming up, it starts heading, and then it shut off quickly. So the nutritive value tends to decline after heading. So you can graze it just within about a month or a month and a half. But if you hay it, it can be a very good hay crop option. Then we look at forage sorghums. We've been doing these variety trials in Garden City, Bellsville, and then in Hayes, where I'm located. We've done sorghum Sudan grass, forage sorghum, and then we also look at millets. We plant this in May or June. Most of the time, even if we have very dry springs, we tend to have rain in May. It rains towards the end of May, so we have enough moisture to plant the forage sorghums. One other thing I need to point out is the potential for nitrate accumulation in the forages. Logan is going to talk about this later on, but these forage sorghums, they tend to grow very well if we have nitrogen available and we have enough moisture. When we hit a dry cycle in July or August, when it doesn't rain, this nitrate tends to accumulate in the plant. So Logan will talk about this a little bit later. Then one thing we also found was millets. They don't produce as much as the forage sorghum, but they have less prussic acid issues. But the yields are a little bit lower than sorghum Sudan. Most recently, we have had a prussic acid-free forage sorghum that was released by S&W Seed. It tends to do very well, but the deer and jackrabbits also loves it. So in our small plots, they pick them up. You plant it, and then they'll go in and pick those varieties that are prussic acid-free. So the 2 years we have done this, we have to replant it. But this picture here is from Ford County. This is on a bigger production field. It tends to do very well. When they started grazing this in August, I was there, so I took this picture from that field. We've been doing this for over 10 years now. This is average yields of forage sorghum, millet, Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan, which is the yellow bars. On average, where we have a little bit more rainfall, like in Garden City that we irrigate, we can produce over 10,000 pounds dry matter per acre. And statistically, there's no difference between the sorghum Sudan, Sudan grass, even millets tends to do well in Garden City. And then the forage sorghum, the yields are not that different because there's enough water to get them established, especially the millets. You go to Bellsville, the sorghum Sudan is doing a lot better than forage sorghum similar to Hayes. But one thing we found in Hayes, this is the millet. The average yield is about 5,000 pounds per acre on dry land. The seed is very small, so in most years we plant it, the germination is not very good. The stance is a little bit poor in dry land situations because you have to plant it around like an inch deep. So if you don't have enough rainfall to get it up, and then if you are not lucky, it rained the night after planting, it seals up. So that is a problem with the millet. And then we also found that when you hay it doesn't regrow like the forage sorghum does. The forage sorghum have very good regrowth potential, especially sorghum Sudan. When you hay it or you graze it, and you have enough moisture to regrow. This is a picture from the same field. This is the Ford County prussic acid-free forage sorghum being grown here. They grazed it in August. They took the cattle off in early September, and then we had another bunch of rain. It seems like last year there was rain every 2 weeks, or within a week we will have some rainfall in September. So we got quite a bit of regrowth from that. And then they put the cattle back on there to graze in November. And John sent me this picture in December on Christmas to look at how the field has done. So they were able to graze it and then went back and regraze it of the regrowth. And we still have quite a bit of residue to protect the surface. So one thing about these sorghums is you see it at 7.5 inch row spacing or 10 inch row spacing. It tends to grow very well, put up a lot of above ground biomass, but also have a lot of roots into the soil. So it can hold the soil together. Look at how much residue we have here. This has been grazed twice. We still have close to about 2,000 pounds of biomass on the soil surface. In terms of soil protection, this is better than growing grain sorghum. You plant grain sorghum in 30-inch row spacing. You have the inter rows. After you harvest it, you still have a lot of residue there. The wind blows all the time in December, November, January through May. When the wind blows, it's pick it up, most of the residue will be in the ditch. If you have a forage sorghum, like with this narrow row spacing, in terms of building the soil, just looking at the soil perspective, this has enough roots, and then you have a lot of biomass on the soil surface to protect the soil. So integrating these forages, not only providing forage for livestock, but for soil health management is a very good tool that we can use to protect our soils. Then we have a lot of sorghum and corn residue. This is some data that Dr. Sandy Johnson in Kobe put together. We can get about 10 million tons of corn residue every year in Kansas, across Kansas. Within Western Kansas, we can get about 70,000 tons of sorghum residue. This is a lot of biomass that we can graze, but unfortunately, some of these end up in the ditch, right? You harvest it, the wind blows, and you can get some of it picked up. But still, it's a very good resource. If you manage it properly, you can graze it. We recommend that you graze about 50% of the biomass, leaving about 50% of the residue on the surface to protect the soil. Most recently, we've been looking at legume alternatives. One of the legumes that we've worked with is cowpea. Cowpea is drought tolerant. They grow it mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, in the semi-arid regions, areas where they get about 12 inches of annual precipitation. You can grow this cowpea for grain. You can also grow it for forage. This is very drought tolerant, so this will be good for Western Kansas because we don't get that much rainfall. So we've been looking at this for forage production and also for grain. So we did these experiments here in Garden City, and then we also have a site in Hayes and also in Bushland, Texas. So we evaluated 3 varieties: iron clay, California black eye, and then we have another variety Ace. What we did was looking at different planting days. We planted this in May and June and then July. The May planting, we had about 4 inches of rainfall on top of it. The seed up, it didn't come out. But so this data is for the average across the June and then the July planting. The iron clay variety produced about 4,000 pounds dry matter per acre. That is the forage. It was able to get some seed headed, and we were able to harvest about 1,500 pounds per acre grain. The other varieties were not able to produce any grain. This California black eye variety, the seed quality was not that great, so the germination was very bad. But it set up some very good pods. But you have one plant there, one plant over there, so you cannot combine. But we are going to repeat this and try to get some good quality seed. My colleagues, Lucas Haig and then Ginny, they've been doing a lot of variety trials out in Kobe, looking at cowpea for grain production. They've been doing this for about 3 years now, 3 or 4 years, and it seems to do very well in Northwest Kansas as well. The other legume that we're looking at is lab. This is a picture of lab here in Hayes. And then in Garden City, it did well the same way. It's drought tolerant, and this is well adapted to alkaline soils. So this will be a good fit for Western Kansas, especially Southwest Kansas, where the pH is a little bit higher. When you grow legumes in a high pH soil, they tend to have iron deficiency chlorosis. We see even grain sorghum here in Southwest Kansas. Some years we see a lot of iron chlorosis. I did some work in Tribune in 2015 and 2016, where we were looking at screening sorghum hybrids and looking at how we can manage iron deficiency chlorosis. Even in sorghum and corn, we tend to see that on high pH soil. So legumes are very susceptible, but lab is somehow tolerant, and it does very well in alkaline soils. This is data that we have collected last year. We did a forage production on 3 lab varieties. They all did very well. The yields ranges from about 4,800 to about 6,000 pounds per acre dry matter. This last year was a little bit different. We had a lot of rain, but on average, we're getting about 3,500 pounds per acre dry matter from these lab varieties as well. So how do we fit this into our rotations? There are various ways that we can do this. I drew this crop production charts with the help of Logan when he was working with me at Hayes. So this is a typical wheat sorghum fallow rotation. It can also be wheat corn fallow rotation. We can plant forage sorghum. Sorry, we can plant forage triticale or oat into sorghum or corn stubble in March, and then utilize it as forage resource sometime in May or June, and then we can terminate that and go back to winter wheat. Or the other option is you can plant triticale in September after wheat. You can start grazing this in November all the way through April, and then you terminate it and go back to grain sorghum. After sorghum, you can go back to another springtime forage crop. Or you can do this, you plant a summer forage right after wheat harvest, sorghum Sudan, and then you let it grow till October or September, utilize it as a forage. You can hay it or graze it. Next year, you go back to grain sorghum. After sorghum, you can go back to spring oat or spring triticale. This is what we are doing in our research plus out in Hayes. So we set up some experiments to look at how we can integrate these annual forages to diversify our wheat-based crop rotations. We started this study in 2021, so we are about 5 years into this. So what we are doing here is to look at growing forage sorghum and then grazing it as part of the rotation, or we grow grain sorghum in a wheat grain sorghum fallow rotation and graze the sorghum stalks. You can replace this with corn. Instead of sorghum, it can be corn, and it's the same principle. We are monitoring crop yields and also looking at soil health impacts. So these are the treatments that we had. We have wheat grain sorghum fallow. We have wheat grain sorghum that we graze the sorghum stalks, and then the third year is fallow. So 1 and 2 are the same treatments. Treatment number 3, we plant winter wheat. Right after wheat harvest, we plant sorghum Sudan that we graze. And then the next year, we have sorghum Sudan that we graze. And the third year, we had it as fallow. This year, we are replacing this fallow with oat as a forage resource. Then the 4th treatment is the same thing, but instead of grazing, we are haying the sorghum Sudan grass. This big plots, the plots are about 120 feet wide by 120 feet long. You can see this picture here. We have grain sorghum growing alongside with it. We have forage sorghum that we are grazing. Here is a closer look at the cattle grazing the forage sorghum plots. What we're doing here is our goal is to manage this to leave about 50% of the residue on the soil surface. So at heading time when we are about to graze this, we go in and take forage measurements to know how much available forage we have. And then we adjust our stocking rate based on the goal that we want to remove about 50% of the above ground biomass. This is one of the plots. This is the post-weed forage sorghum that we have grazed. Then this picture here is the haying treatment. What we are doing in this case is we are harvesting the hay about 6 inches tall. Two reasons why we're doing that. If we cut it about 6 inches tall, we have a little bit more growing points that it can regrow. The second point is also based on some of the work that we have done, the nitrates are mostly accumulated in the base. So if we harvest it as a little bit tall height, then we are leaving most of the nitrate at the base of the plant. So that is why we are doing that. If we harvest it a little bit higher, we have more residue on the soil surface. And we are grazing the sorghum stalks in November, sometime the first week or second week in November. This is some of the pictures of the field. This is how we're doing it. I bought some heavy panels, cattle panels that we use to fence the plots. So this is a little bit more work, but we do fence it out so the cattle are in the plots. When we started doing this, we were using hot wire fence. And then the cattle sometimes they stay in, but the deer also comes through the field. So they don't respect the wires, they just go through, and the cows will be everywhere. We have to, the next day you have to go chase them around. So I bought this so we can move these panels, fence them off, and then put the cattle in. This year, in November, when we're grazing the sorghum stalks, we have about 60-mile-an-hour winds, and it moved the panels. I was surprised to see that the wind can just move the panels. It just lift them right up, and then we have to go haul the cows in the evening. Then after the storm passed, we put them back in. So it's a lot of work, but we're trying to generate some data that we can share. So this is how the plot looks like after grazing 50% off. So this is when we started. When we graze 50% off, then we move the cattle to the next plot. If we have enough time, this is grazed in August. So we have a little bit of rainfall. I took this picture in October. See, we have a little bit more growth from these, and then we have cover to protect the soil. This year we have regrowth as tall as that because of all the rain that we have. This is the picture of the sorghum stalks that we are grazing. The same idea. We fence it off with these panels. We measure how much we have, and then we put the livestock based on the small area, but then we stock it, mob graze it, and then move the cattle to the next floor. Over the years, this is some data that we have collected. How much forage are we producing? So on the full season forage sorghum, on average, we are producing about 7,000 pounds per acre dry matter. When we planted in post-weed, the yields about half, about 3,000 pounds per acre when we planted in post-weed. But the yield varies from year to year. The full season, our lowest yield was about 5,700 pounds per acre. And then our highest yields were last year, 8,300 pounds per acre dry matter because of all the rain. The post-weed, the yield varies from year to year too. Our highest yield were 24, about 5,000 pounds per acre. And then 2022, we got 800 pounds per acre. It was dry after we harvest. We planted it, it germinated, and just didn't grow. This is something that can easily happen in dryland situations. So in this case, we did not graze it or harvested it. We just left it as residue to protect the soil. One of the things that we are also recommending is this is planted into winter wheat stubble. Our wheat stubble is one of the best stubbles that we have. If it's dry, don't plant through it. Just leave the field as fallow. Because if you plant through it, you destroy the straw and you don't have that much production. When the wind blows, we have seen long-term no-till fields blow. In the fall, when you have the wheat there, it may be okay. But come spring, if you have cut through the residue, we have 60 miles per hour wind, you have all the wheat stubble break up and it will be in the alleys. We have had that happen We have something happened in Trigo County last year spring, where a field that has been raised planted to wheat, the wheat field, then they planted it to sorghum in June. 1 week after planting in June, we have strong winds and soil was up in the air. It was not a pretty sight. So that can happen. So we also monitored how much residue is remaining after we graze this. So when we graze it, we have about 50% to 60% of the residue remaining on the soil surface. And that is good. Our target was 50%, so we were right on target. But when we hay it, we left about 30% to 40% of the above ground biomass as residue on the surface. This is good. It's still a lot of biomass. If you have about 5,000 pounds and you take about 30% off, you still have a lot of residue on the soil surface. Then we look at whether weed yields. Well, these treatments impact weed yields. The blue bar is our wheat grain sorghum fallow. That is our check. The orange bars are wheat grain sorghum where we graze the sorghum stalks. And the gray bar is wheat, forage sorghum graze fallow, and the yellow bars are where we hated. Our yields in 2024 were very low because of the drought. 2025 was very good yields where we have drought, and also the wheat streak mosaic virus had a significant impact on our yields. But 2025 was better. We have about 34 to 42 bushels per acre wheat yields. Statistically, if we do the statistics on this, even though the where we graze has a little bit more yield, statistically they were not different. Then when we look at sorghum yields, the plots that we graze the sorghum stalks is the orange bars. Statistically, there's no differences, but 2025 we had better yields, about 88 bushels per acre grazed sorghum yields. If you look at the cropping system economic returns, this is the data that we've gathered in 2024, 2025. We look at wheat grain sorghum fallow, the net returns were negative. Where we had the forage sorghum, the net returns were negative. But if we graze the sorghum stalks or we graze the forage sorghum, the net returns was about $62 or $65 per acre, which was profitable than where we have wheat grain sorghum fallow. In 2025, net returns were better because of better crop yields. So the wheat grain sorghum fallow was profitable, more profitable than where we planted the forage sorghum and grazed it. Where we grazed the sorghum stalks is the most profitable among the 4 treatments. Then we also look at crop residue. If you graze in this, what is the impact on the soil? Logan will be talking about some of the soil health data that we have measured from these fields. But I want to point out the crop residue return. This is after 3 years of doing this. What is the crop residue amount at the time of winter wheat planting? The wheat grain sorghum fallow, where we had the forage sorghum is not different. Where we graze the forage sorghum in the rotation, we had a lot of residue on the soil surface. That is because we have regrowth from the forage sorghum. When we graze the sorghum stalks, the residue cover was significantly less than the wheat grain sorghum fallow that we did not graze. What about cover crops? We've been doing cover crop research, looking at it as a forage resource since 2015. We have these experiments at Cedar Bluff, south of the Cedar Bluff near Brownell. We have Paisley has a ranch down there, so that is where we have these experiments. We're looking at whether you graze the cover crop or you hay, what is the impact on soils, and also what is the impact on net returns. But if you use it as a forage resource, you can get some economic benefit, but you are removing the residue. Are you going to decrease the residue and have a negative effect on the soil? You can also cause soil compaction issues that can affect water storage, or you can, if you remove a lot of residue, you can also impact soil organic matter content in the soil. So we've been doing this since 2015, answering a couple of questions. You want to graze these cover crops, how much are we producing? How much realistically can we produce in Western Kansas to use it as a forage resource? And if we graze it, what is the impact on the environment, especially crop yields and also soil health benefits? And we also look at the economics of the whole production system. So we are looking at this in the wheat sorghum fallow rotation. These are spring planted cover crops that are planted in the fallow phase in March, and then we graze this in June or towards the end of May when the grass species in the mixture has headed. So we have 4 treatments. Stem fallow is our check, standing cover crops, hay cover crop, or graze cover crop. We are grazing the cover crop, like I said, when the grass species head. Here again, we harvested the cover crop about 6 inches stubble height, so that we have enough residue to protect the soil. Here again, we're using our panels. We bought these panels to use them for grazing to make sure we're keeping the cattle in the field. Stocking rate varies from year to year. Here we are not measuring animal performance. We just use mob grazing to graze the plots so we can determine the impacts on soil. That is where my interest was, and also look at the impact on the crop yields. The one treatment that we added based on some experience we had in 2012 is what we call flex cover crop. A flex cover crop is essentially in the spring, you go in, take water measurements. In this case, we are using the Paul Brown probe. If you can push the probe up to 12 inches, then there's enough moisture there for you to plant. And then one thing that we also suggested, sometimes it may have enough water, but it could be dry over the summer. So look at the precipitation outlook to see if it's going to be favorable. Then you can go ahead and plant. But this is not very accurate. The forecasting is not very accurate, but at least it gives you some information to make a decision on whether you want to plant or you want to leave it as follows. If it's dry, you don't plant the cover crop. If it's wet, plant the cover crop to take advantage of the wet years. One experience we had in 2012, we went in and planted a spring cover crop, planted through sorghum stubble, 9 sorghum stubble in March, and then it didn't rain. So the cover crop sat there, it didn't germinate, and the wind came in, the wind blew, and the soil also, we had some erosion occurring. Actually, our stem fallow plot was way better than where we had a cover crop. It germinated, and then there was not much rain to get it going. So this is something that we are now advocating that, yeah, you can plant cover crops, but here, especially in dryland, you have to be careful. Some years, you may not have the rain or moisture to get the cover crop up. If you can't get it up and you destroy the residue, you're going to create problems. So over the years, this is some of the yields that we have gathered from our research at HB Ranch. The dark bars represent how much forage we have. The orange bars or red bars represent if we hay, how much residue is left, and the green bars are what is the residue amount left when we graze it. Over the years, yields varies from year to year. Last year, we had over 6,000 pounds per acre dry matter. So our spring cover crop can actually be very productive. None of these were fertilized. These were planted into sorghum stubble. So the residual nitrogen we have is what we use to grow this. But in 2020, 2022, 2021, the yields were around 2,000 pounds per acre. So yields, yes, you can produce a lot of biomass in good years, but in dry years, you don't get that much productivity. On average, if we graze the cover crop, we're removing about 40% of the total plant available forage. If we hay it, we are removing about 70% of the amount of forage that we have. The one thing that we also look at is we can grow these cover crops after sorghum, but when is the best time to produce this to get enough biomass? So we look at 4 planted cover crops, triticale, rapeseed, and also winter peas. We compare that with old traditional pea that is planted in March. This is planted in late November, so late October or early November after sorghum is harvested. So average across 3 years, what we found was if you plant in the fall, the yields are about 700 to 800 pounds per acre more than the spring planted cover crop. Statistically, they are not different. The other issue with the fall planting, you can get a little bit more biomass, but the logistics of it. Some years, when we started this, we had 1 year where we had snow, so we had to plant in late November. The good thing is if you can get it in, it's in the ground, it won't come up to germinate in the spring. So you have sometime by February it start coming up. So you have frost, like frost seeding kind of deal. You already have it there, you don't have to worry about it. But if you wait in the spring, you can go in and plant it. Most of the time when we're doing this in HB Ranch, we're able to plant it every year except 2018 and 2022, where it was so dry that we implemented the flex cover crop treatment. Then we look at the effect of these cover crops on plant available water content at the time of winter wheat planting. This is very important because in our environment, we use fallow to store water. And the reason why we do that is because the precipitation that we get over the growing season is not enough. So the amount of water stored plus the growing season precipitation help us to finish our grain crops. So we look at the amount of water at wheat planting. Growing a cover crop in 2015 had no effect on the amount of water available in the soil. In fact, the cover crop treatments have slightly more water than our chem fallow because that year we terminated cover crop in June. We had enough rainfall in August to replenish what we have used. However, in 2016, 2017, growing a cover crop significantly decreased plant available water at winter wheat planting. 2018 was a wet year for us in the summer, so there was no effect. But these 2 years and then 2019, growing a cover crop actually had the amount of water available for the next crop planting. Then we look at winter wheat yields after cover crops. Here again, the dark bars represent the chem fallow. The standing cover crops are the orange bars. The green bars is the hay treatment, and the gray bar is the grace treatment. When we measure soil water content in 2015, cover crop had no effect. So it had no effect on subsequent winter wheat crop yields in 2016. But 2017, 2018, growing a cover crop, and also in 2019, growing a cover crop significantly had a negative effect on subsequent crop yields, the subsequent winter wheat crop yields. 1 year out of the 10 years that we've been doing this, 2021, our cover crops actually increased subsequent wheat crop yields. What happened in 2021 is we got some good rain at HB in April and in May. When you grow a cover crop, it can increase soil organic matter content. The soil structure was improved, and then it can increase infiltration. But you need the water to come, right? You improve the soil. If it doesn't rain, you can't store it. So it rained at the right time, so we're able to get the water that infiltrated into the system, and that improved crop yields. And this is kind of similar to what others have been observing, where it rained a little bit more. But over the years, that was just the only year that the cover crop improved wheat yields. On average, statistically, there's no difference in yields between our cover crop treatments and our chem fallow. The chem fallow was about 3 bushels per acre more than our cover crop treatment. One thing that we also found was, regardless of management, whether you hay the cover crop, you left it as a standing cover crop, or you graze it, the impacts on yields were not different. Then we look at weed suppression. Cover crops help us for weed suppression. We have a lot of glyphosate resistant weeds, and growing a cover crop in this case, help us to reduce how much wheat biomass we have there. But if this is a standing cover crop treatment, what about if we use it as a forage resource? Does it going to impact that benefit? What we found was if you graze it or if you hay, it's actually reduced the weeds in the system even more than the true cover crop treatment. All our cover crop treatment reduce weed biomass compared to the chem fallow. The chem fallow treatment in this case was sprayed 4 times in the fallow period. When we planted a cover crop, we saved 2 herbicide applications in these experiments. Then we look at the economics of the production system. These are 4 treatments. The first bar, the dark purple bar, is our chem fallow, followed by our standing cover crop. The next bar is our hay treatment, and the last bar is our graze cover crop treatment. Our net returns varies from year to year, but in general, where we use the cover crop as a forage resource, for example, 2016, growing a cover crop had no effect on subsequent crop yields. So when we use it as a forage resource, we have significantly greater net returns. Even when we grew it as a true cover crop, the net returns were not different compared to the chem fallow. However, 2017, 2018, growing a cover crop hurt our wheat yields, and that reflected here. The cover crop treatment, when we planted a cover crop, used it as a true cover crop, the net returns in both years were less than the chem fallow. However, if we used it as a forage resource, the net returns were greater than where we have the chem fallow treatment. In 2019, growing a cover crop hurt our subsequent wheat yields, and the net returns were actually negative compared to the chem fallow, where we use it as a forage resource, significantly increase our net returns. So the story is, if we use the cover crop as a forage resource, it's more profitable than growing it and leaving it as a true cover crop because of the impact on subsequent crops. So we can use this cover crop as a forage resource. The impact on yields is similar to just growing it as a cover crop, but the net returns overall is more profitable than chem fallow. We do have some data on some of our benefits. Dogan will share that in his presentation. Then we did this on farm as well. We had producers that we worked with. We had a site in Marquette, which is a lot bit wet than where we are in Western Kansas, that is in Central Kansas. Then we have a site in Hayes and then a site in Alexander, where we were doing this on farm, comparing grazing versus non-graze cover crops. An example of a field, this the Alexander site is 80 acres. We split it into 4 paddocks. We had the big areas we grazed it, the smaller areas that we did not graze. We separated these with a polywire fence. The cover crops were spring cover crops like old traditional pea, barley, and radishes. And then we have a summer cover crop of forage sorghum, German millet, sunflower, sunhemp, and radishes. So what we were doing was, this was a wheat corn fallow rotation in Alexander, planted this cover crop in the spring, grazed it the following year. We planted wheat after the cover crops that same year, and then went back to the summer cover crops and grazed it as well. The grazing, stocking rate, and the number of days of grazing also varies from site to site. This is a picture from the site in Alexander. This is the areas that we were allowing the cattle to graze. If you look at here closely, you see the polywire fence that is separating the graze and then the non-graze area. It's the same field. You have the cattle settled where they are grazing, and then this is the area that we did not graze. One thing I want to point out here, this is our graze field. After we move the cattle, there's a lot of regrowth occurring, so you can see that it's growing back. It's not really different from the ungrazed areas when we leave it for about 3 more weeks after we took the cattle off. This is a picture from the site in Hayes. This is summer cover crops. I took this picture in June, and then I came back 1 month later when we were putting the cattle there to graze. And this is the producer that we work with the cattle. We're in there, we couldn't see them. the summer forage sorghums and millet. This German millet is not that tall, but the Sudan grass grew so tall that we couldn't even see where the cattle are. We produce about 7,200 to 7,500 pounds dry matter per acre that year. So on average, though, because when we remove the cattle, these cover crops are able to regrow and provide residue cover. The amount of biomass when we started grazing is not significantly different after we finish grazing. So this is good. We can have more residue, even though it's less than the ungrazed areas that we did not graze. We still have enough residue to protect the soil. This is some data that we collected looking at number of grazing days and animal performance. If you look at the on-farm side, depending on whether it's spring or summer or winter time, the crude protein levels were very, very high. So this way grazed very at a tender age, about 8 to 10 inches tall. When the cover crop grew, at that point they started grazing it. So the crude protein levels were high. The number of grazing days was also very important to these farmers that we work with. It ranges from about 31 to about 41 days of grazing, depending on this side in Alexander. The first grazing was spring, and then we grazed it again in 2020 with the summer cover crops had about 41 days of grazing. In all cases, we did get some livestock gains. Yeah, you can do all these, but residue management is very, very important. This is the residue cover in market after we took the cattle off. See a lot of residue. This was after grazing. He terminated these in May and went ahead and planted soybean into the stubble. You graze it, but you have to have residue left. Allow it to regrow, or you can remove a little bit, about maybe 50% of the biomass, leave enough on the surface to protect the soil. This is very crucial for us in a dryland environment. So in conclusion, we can grow these annual forages or cover crops as part of our rotation in this environment, but yield varies from year to year. So in some years, like we saw in our own study in Hayes, the production was less than what we need for even a forage use. So in some years, we have instances where you do not have enough forage production for livestock and also to meet residue goals to protect the soil. If it's dry, we propose that you do what we call flex fallow cover crops or forages. You don't plant the cover crop, just leave the field fallow. If you have enough moisture, you go ahead and plant. They get enough forage that you could use. If you do this properly, you can meet your forage goals and also improve soil health. Logan will talk about some of the soil health data, but residue management is very, very critical. But if you manage this very well, you can integrate this livestock into the production system, increase the profitability, and also maintain soil health as well. Once again, my name is Augustine Obour. I'm based at the Ag Research Center in Hayes. This work is funded by the Ogalala Aquifer Grant Program. We also got some money from NRCS to conduct this research, and USDA Sarah Grant provided some funding to support us. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Any questions or comments? I run through this very fast, but if you have any questions, just I'll be happy to clarify.
When you figure your return per acre, and your ones that are grazed have positive net returns, how are you figuring that it is positive? Are you figuring it off of beef gain, or are you figuring it off of feed savings?
Yeah, good question. So in this experiment, we did not measure the gain. So we are estimated as like feed savings. Yeah. So your last comment is what we did. so we know how much we produce. So we, based on that amount, what would be the animal units that you need? So the feed savings. Yeah, great. I didn't mention that, but that is what we did. Yeah. Any other comments?
So when you do that though, are you including like your fencing expenses and
No, it did. Yeah,
doesn't involve the.
that is a good question. Here we just we didn't include the fencing cost because we are just what would be the safe, we assume that you have that fencing available, but I think that is a legitimate question. Yeah, but if you do it on a bigger scale though, you can actually measure the livestock gains and then it will still be more profitable than not grazing.
Are there any, I've never looked online and it hasn't interested me until recently, but are there any sets of research that over the years of just grazing grain wheat?
Yeah.
Obviously that was common practice a long time ago, but not many people do it anymore, so.
Yeah, there is in Kansas, we've done some work, my colleague John Holman has done. He did not graze it, but kind of simulating how much you can take off and then estimate how much you can grade. But there's a lot of work in Oklahoma that has looked at this dual purpose but there used to be some work here in Kansas, but since a lot of people are not doing it, I think Ramilo is doing some work on that now. But it's not actually putting the cattle there, but just harvesting is at good stage like we are doing and then estimating how much you can remove.
Are you talking about a standard dual purpose wheat?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I put cattle, have a cattle on it, yeah.
I've had one. Exactly, absolutely. So I mean, in parts of Kansas, that's the standard practice.
Yes, yeah, but
And
I think we've all, or a lot of us have moved
Yeah,
away
yeah.
from that.
Yeah.
Especially where I'm west, but I
it especially in times like right now, it pencils out very well. Now, some caveats that I would add on that is, a lot of our breeding programs that have focused out toward more western Kansas and Colorado have not been breeding for grazers. So a lot of those, either number one, they don't produce as much forage. Everything looks like a good grazer right now because of how big the wheat crop has gotten. But a lot of them are not really made for good grazing. And in that way, they may not tolerate the grazing pressure the way something like stuff out of Oklahoma State would. I mean, they are the grazing grain program. Of course, I would be very hesitant to take anything from them and try to grow it up here in Lane County. Because I can tell you that it carries zero resistance to wheat streak at all. As the wheat streak issue has moved its way east, that was a big question I answered in South Central Kansas a lot this year. Was everybody wanted something that was going to be a good grazer for them, but brought in some wheat streak resistance to act. So that's kind of the place we're right now. There's a couple of good varieties that could be good for it out of the TAM lineup. That might feel better, but yeah, it pencils quite well.
Yeah, but some of those varieties, the yields will be low, right? After grazing, the yields will be
Well,
the grain yields.
what I'm saying is some of them are bred for grazing,
Yeah.
so they're not gonna be they're not gonna be making your, they're probably not gonna hit that super high yield potential, but they're made for a dual purpose system. So, and especially at a time like this, the value of a day of grazing versus a bushel of wheat.
Yeah.
Or, a week of grazing versus whatever, it does pencil quite well.
but there hasn't been any K-State research this far west.
Yeah, this far west, yeah, we don't have it, but we do have some.
The last stuff that I have would have been some work that John did, and I think that side,
John did some work in 2008, 2009, but it wasn't grazed. it wasn't great, but just simulated grazing. So we do have that data, but it's not actual grazing like what we are doing. But we can send you that information if you want it, but we do have some simulated grazing study, but not actual grazing work.
Good enough, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jerry, do you have a question?
Yeah, okay, so going back to the piece numbers for piece examining that cow piece, what about these streams, yellows, the difference in terms of variety on them?
Yeah, so there's a lot of difference in that. The problem we have is when we plant them, they don't produce as much yield as you would want. We do have we've tried forage peas. They did a little bit okay in it needs a little bit cooler environment. We get a little bit too hot quickly in western Kansas and dry land. It does. If you have some irrigation, it works very well. But in Kobe, we did some studies in Kobe compared to HB. In Kobe, they tend to do very well. We were growing the spring peas and winter peas. They do well over there compared to Hayes. And then we try some winter peas in Hayes. If you are growing it for forage, maybe okay, but for the grain yields were not very high. And besides, we also have jackrabbits. The jackrabbits on our small plots, they just kind of
it's funny that you reminded me of jackrabbits. I had a bit of an impromptu, wheat variety trial last year was kind of an impromptu palatability trial. High country from plant seeds, they found it every time, like 4 different plots of high country, and they tore that stuff up. They're not brand loyal, they didn't like Rockstar. On the winter peas, one thing that I have observed, we haven't necessarily put it in these cases, is I think the people that are getting the really big yields in the winter forage tree, like mustard and wheat, we need to get it in earlier in the fall. Because if we're putting it in late, I think that is limiting the establishments and over winter potential of those. We're in that fun sweet spot where, you know, if we can get it over winter, it can be very productive, but it doesn't rely really over winter. It has just produced an obscene amount of forage down in like parts of Oklahoma and Texas. But not only in the South, like they're putting it in after wheat. So as opposed to trying to fit it in after road crop.
I don't know, but I have them to those, then the next question is, you put it into, especially it's like your piece, you got it overlaid.
For spring.
Yeah, for the spring, we plant them in March. We planted them in March. They will, if you plant them alone, they did a little bit better. When you plant them in a mixture, the competition is a little bit not as great. And then the other thing is when we were doing this, the seed cost was very, very high. I don't remember now, but it was very expensive to buy. And then the other thing that we run into is getting the right seed. One time we wanted the grain type. We called the seed dealer. Yes, we have the grain type. We planted it and it was the forage type. So whatever they have available, they will just sell it to you. So that is one of the biggest challenge. And then the other thing also is folks have been asking about how much nitrogen is it going to fix. The problem is the nitrogen fixation depends on how much biomass you can produce. When we have done this, the best years we have had was about 2,000 pounds of dry land. You are not going to fix that much nitrogen with that amount. You have to produce an upwards of over 4,000 pounds per acre. And if you look at the seed cost, that time, it was around almost like $3 per pound. And then the sun hemp is the one that does very well. that will grow very tall and then even set nodules. But it was $5 a pound. That was 2022 when we did. I don't know how much the seed cost will be now.
It's worth an hour.
Yeah, we did inoculate them, but no, you have residual nitrogen in most of after row crop. So it's going to use that nitrogen and then it will not make that much.
So when you mix your peas with your oats, have you seen the peas really show up in that mix well for you? Do you feel
We
like
didn't plan it very hard, but it was, you know. Dale Slickler's comment is the limit just enough pennies and probably protein by about 10%.
do you feel like you did? Do you feel like you did get that part
According to analysis.
Okay, okay. Because that's sometimes the question that we have of like adding those digits. I mean, that's not uncommon for wheats and the oats.
And then at HB, we saw that the protein content where we had the old pea 30 kg was about 14% compared to between 10 and 12% with the grasses. So it's pretty close to what you guys, the guy told you.
It didn't work in the stand, but it was.
What were you putting in the stand?
Peas.
Oh, as a full season?
As a, yeah, and maybe it was one of the, so,
Yeah, you probably need cow. Yeah, you have to do a warm season. Kind of cowpea will do better. At HB, your studies it was cowpea and sunhen, right? Yeah, cowpea and sunhen. Any other questions?
How do you figure your dry, or was it? I should have looked. Somewhere in here you talk about, dry matter left on the surface after just graze. How do you measure that?
Yeah, so how much dry biomass we have. So at the beginning of grazing, we go in and take the biomass before we graze. When we take the cattle off, we go back and take the biomass
We're just
again.
returning it.
So when you subtract the difference, you get how much is left on the soil surface.
Because I've always wanted to see, specifically the K-State study to do, like, it'd be too complicated because there'd be too many axes of it, but I want to see depth of residue, duration of residue, soil temperature, and then moisture, because those four things all obviously interact, but I don't know how you quantitate it.
But we have we have done the residue height, right?
They had some of that, so Alan Schlegel had some of that out there that is residue height work there at Tribune. But I don't think that he measured all of the things
All
that
the
you're,
parameters.
that you're commenting on. It was more of a cut low, cut high stripper. And how did that relate to
Soil water content.
However, they did not, to my knowledge, ever measure temperature. That was never something that they looked at.
In that case, the idea was soil water, how much water.
That's all they cared about, with the assumption that cool temperatures weren't a limitation for us, for better or worse.
But yeah, residue can impact the temperature. But what is the interest in the temperature?
Well, because of the moisture, exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you have a picture, I don't know where it is, but there's a picture in here on the second page. Your slide where you have something, I guess, not grazed, it's grazed, from this last December. And if the comment is, look at all the residue on the ground, that's one thing, but sometimes that kind of residue isn't the right kind of residue. Sometimes it doesn't translate to good or bad.
Yeah, you want to see the height is very important. Residue height is important in terms of capturing snow, and there's a lot of things you can measure, but we do have how many experiments do I have?
Yeah, it's limited. It's hard to. I understand.
We have so much.
Yes.
But it's a good point, and we can do some of these measurements because we actually have the plots. All you have to do is we have started a study. We wanted to look at how much can you remove before you impact the soil. So we have a 50% treatment, 75%, and then graze out. So we have three grazing treatments. We try to do them at the same time. We spent more than 1 month last year just grazing the plots. And at some point, everybody was burnt out. We were just doing it, but we have done it 1 year. We want to do it again. But you have to have a lot of biomass to be able to do that. Last year was a good year to do that. We will see if we can get enough moisture this year. It looks pretty good. So if we can get, we already planted it. We planted it in the fall. So hopefully it comes up and we can duplicate it again. But it's a lot of work to be moving the panels. So what we had 10 heifers, and then we split them into the different plots, and you have to be there every day to see how much they've removed so you can move them. But it's something that we need to do to generate the data.
I think your comments about the quality of the residue and how it translates into soil temperature and soil water is going to hinge on how long is it going to sit there before you're going back into that next crop. So, like for example, with what we've had for the cover crops at Garden City, as well as up at the HB and Trigo County, whatever effect the standing cover crop had is the effect that the hay one had. So in terms of soil water depletion as it's growing, to soil water at crop plant at next crop wheat planting, it's about the same, but the duration, the period from termination to planting is maybe 90 days. And it's whatever one did, the other did, is basically what we've seen. Now, if we went out longer, yeah, the value of that tall upright stubble, probably we could see that play out. But we're intending on getting back into that wheat crop. And in fact, NRCS, the policy for this county would be 15 days is their minimum. I've only one time in Russell County, we terminated and then went to Milo 15 days later. But more often than not, we're going longer than that, and we're not really picking up much of a difference.
And then the other thing about the racing,
And I wouldn't want it to go out.
would depend on how long you want it to grow, right? So if you terminate it early, the carbon to nitrogen ratio is very low and it will decompose. If you allow it to grow longer, it's going to use more water. And then most of these species also have triticale, right? If the seed matures and dry down, it's going to volunteer in your wheat crop unless you are going into a different crop that you can kill it. So it's kind of you have to strike a balance. If you want a longer stage straw, you have to let it mature. When it grow longer, to use a lot of water, and then it can also become a volunteer in the next crop. So it's a lot of challenge.